Hello there, I'm glad you're here. Hello there, I'm glad you're here. Here to talk about rule number 7. Hello my friends, Bill here. So we're here to talk about rule 7, which deals with communication. And rule 7 came about back when I worked for IBM and worked with customers on problems. If you don't make progress with email, pick up the phone. The idea that having that instant communication, verbal cues is really important. So I learned that from a couple of my mentors. The first of that was Joe Tingley, one of my earliest mentors, who often when we were debugging a problem, he would say, "Come on, Bill, we're going to go see so-and-so." It seemed like Joe knew everybody and was very effective at problem solving and getting the right people involved and talking through what the problem was. The other gentleman was Jim Sicciano, affectionately known as Jim Sitch, who worked multiple decades in IBM Level 2 for ZVM, and customers would rave about Jim Sitch. Jim had the knack for a couple things that were pretty important. First was just that knack of knowing when to set aside the electronic communication and pick up the phone. He also had this great knack for talking through problems with customers, asking the right questions, explaining how certain things were supposed to work. And out of that, they would have these great eureka moments where things would come together and they would solve a lot of problems over the years. And so hats off to both of them. So electronic communication can be really convenient, right? You can take your time, write out what you think, but there's some downsides to it. One is the fact that it's a back and forth protocol where you have to wait. And depending on what's going on with both sides, they may be multitasking. They may have lots of other stuff going on. And sometimes you'll send a message and they'll need clarification. And so now they're going to send something back with, "I don't understand this, can you re-explain it?" And depending on what kind of time zones and things like that you're dealing with, it can really take a long time to do that communication. And also you lose the tone of voice. You lose all those verbal cues that you get with the phone or face-to-face. So there's a lot of research that's been done over time in this area by psychologists and neuroscientists, things about how the voice impacts our interactions, how even the production of oxytocin may be involved, and even more research about communication coming out of the pandemic. And so one of the papers I looked at was from 2020 by two gentlemen, Amit Kumar from the University of Texas at Austin and Nicholas Epley from the University of Chicago. Now, these gentlemen did a series of experiments looking at how we feel about verbal communication. And it was pretty cool. So the first experiment was one where they had a number of participants in a study who at one point in time had lost contact with friends, family, former colleagues. And they asked them how they felt about reconnecting with people via either email or a phone. Which mechanism would they prefer doing that? How awkward did they think that would be? How successful do they think they would be in reconnecting with former friends and colleagues? And then they actually had the people do that. Now, they randomly selected a methodology for each of the people. So half the people used the phone, half the people used email. And the results turned out that those that used phone did a far better job of reconnecting with people, far better than they predicted even. Now, there was a higher level of awkwardness, but that's kind of to be expected, I guess. So experiment number 2 was one where, again, they took a group of participants. This time they divided them into 3 groups. And what they did was a variation of an exercise called Fast Friends. Some of you have heard about this. I think it was actually on an episode of Big Bang Theory. And so the idea is that you take 2 strangers and you give them a set of questions to ask each other. Things like, what are you most proud of? What does a perfect day look like to you? Who would you like to have lunch with? So you sit these 2 people down, you have that discussion. Now, what they asked was for these people split up into 3 groups, right? So one group is going to use text-based chat, another is going to use voice chat, and the third group is using video chat. And so for each of those groups, they again ask them something along the lines of, how successful do you think you're going to be in connecting with this other individual, this stranger? How good a friend are you going to become in the short period of time? And so again, they had them actually do the exercise and then asked them other questions afterwards. And a couple of things that were interesting here. So again, remember in this case, the people weren't asked to compare different methodologies. They were just given one. And so they were all felt kind of equally confident in terms of their level of connecting, regardless of what method they were using in terms of prediction. However, the results showed voice and video were far more effective at getting to know and creating a bond with this stranger. Again, a little bit of awkward differences there, but I found that kind of fascinating. So they did other experiments in this study. I won't go into all of them, but one of the main conclusions was that we often underestimate the value of verbal communication. Well, if you're wondering where I am today, I'm at the Appalachian Marsh. It's a unique property. The land is owned by New York State Department of Transportation, but it's managed by Waterman Conservation Center. The land sits in between the westbound and eastbound lanes of Interstate 86. In fact, they almost lost this preserve back when the highways were built. A very interesting story there. A woman named Harriet Marcy had a big influence impact in that. So in the description below, I'll put some links to some videos that give the history on that. That's kind of cool. You do get to go through a little tunnel to get underneath the highway to get here. That's kind of cool. It is called a marsh though for a reason, so a little swampy at spots, but also some other areas where some new boardwalk has been put in thanks to a local Boy Scout. So check it out if you get a chance. A lot of unique plants and birds in this area, part of the value in preserving this. So check it out. So one of the things that also became clear to me, especially in those situations where I was working with a customer on a problem they had, a problem that was typically our fault, was when you get on the phone, or even better yet, if you can see them in person, that conveys a level of commitment to solving the problem. I think there's something special about that verbal connection. So rule number 7 is, if you don't make progress with email, pick up the phone. This idea that we want to consciously consider what communication mechanism we're using, and if we're using something that's not working, consider changing it up. Now, I know I tend to lean towards electronic communication and text and email, partly because of my control issues and wanting to make sure I can frame everything perfectly before I send it out. But looking at this and thinking about it again, I'm thinking I need to take a little bit more risk from time to time. Also looking at that one experiment about reconnecting, there's some people that came to mind which I think I need to pick up the phone and just touch base with them that I haven't talked to in a long time. So I'm curious, do you all have a guideline, or how do you figure out what communication mechanism you're going to use? Do you have certain ones you use for certain purposes? And is there somebody you've reconnected with recently? I would love to hear all about that in the comments below. Drop me something in there and I'd love to hear about it, because that gives us two-way communication. Well, I hope you're having a great day, and we'll talk again soon. Bye now.
I know that it can be